Well, hi everybody. I'm Israel. I'm Executive Director here at the Great River Road Visitor and Learning Center at Freedom Park. One of my favorite longest titles, and we're really excited to have you guys here today. And I'm really pumped that Tom could be here. Tom Struve, of course, you guys all know Tom Struve, which is why he came out, I think, today to hear his stories. I have had the pleasure of meeting Tom Struve through a mutual friend who told me all the dirt about Tom before I met him. And then I met Tom, and it all made sense. So we're really excited to have Tom share with us today. I can't wait to hear his stories, and we're looking forward to selling his books here, too. And so we have his books, and he's going to sign them, and you buy a copy here from us. Tell other people about this. This is the world premiere book released today, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yep. How about that?
This is the first part.
Man, oh man! So, thank you so much for being with us, Tom.
Okay.
And I'll let you introduce we are recording this, so just to let everybody know, this is going to go viral on YouTube. And so just so you know, in case you're part of this and you become famous and have to sign your name on all kinds of things like Tom is going to have to.
There you
go. Tom, thanks
Very
again
good.
for joining us today.
Thanks for
And we're
letting me be
really
here.
excited to hear what you have to say.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Well, thank you all and welcome. Thanks for the great introduction, Israel. And Linda Schneck, the program coordinator, set this all up, and I'm really grateful to her, too. The friends, the donors, and the board of directors from the Great River Road Visitor Center. This place is really so beautiful. It just really is so well done. So today we'll talk about, as Israel said, the book is just out. We made this trip a year ago in August. And I wrote the book over the fall, and I expected it really to kind of be out and all ready to go in March or April. We have a whole bunch of retail partners down the river, all the way down the Mississippi and up the Illinois River and the Ohio River. And I wanted to get the books to them earlier this summer so they had them. And it just took a lot more time than I expected. I did a pile of research for this book that I didn't do with the other books because I just kind of knew the other three river books. I knew the topic so well, but in this case, I wanted this book to be kind of a resource for people who might want to do this trip. And so you'll find a lot of facts and information. The table of contents, we split the trip up into 11 travel days. We spent 14 days traveling, but we averaged about 200 miles. I spent dozens of hours in researching and made myself a kind of a folder with step-by-step maps and kind of planned and plotted, and we had each of the hotel stops laid out and went that way. There is a terrific website that the Federal Highway Administration has that shows the maps, and there's actual written step-by-step, turn-by-turn instructions if you want to do the Great River Road. If a person did every segment that's written on those things, it'd probably take you a month. So there's some places where we didn't take that little turn and go 5 or 20 miles out of the way, and we just scooted along the way. But anyway, it's really a neat setup. The Great River Road goes from Venice to Lake Itasca, Minnesota. There's 80 points of interest in the appendix to the back of the book. We stopped at more than 80 places, but I made a note or a comment or mentioned some of those places inside the book, so I put that in as an appendix at the end. Our stepping off point was Houston. We flew over from Phoenix, and we really, both Shannon and I, liked the Gulf Coast a lot, and we thought that would just be a fun, our original, the point of starting it is Venice, Louisiana, right down here on the peninsula. And there used to be a sign down there. That's a picture of that sign. The sign's no longer around. They keep getting ravaged by hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. There wasn't, well, I think I found the frame, but there was, I had stopped and talked to the guy at the Ace Hardware store too, and he did, well, it's around here someplace. But along the trip, one of the fun things about traveling like this is to meet all the people that you meet and learn all these new things. There was a museum, it's called Mr. Charlie, the first submersible oil rig that they ever used in the Gulf is in escapes me what town it's in. But anyway, it's there. We stopped and toured the museum. It was the prototype for the current oil drilling platforms that everybody uses. It's an interesting story. When they built it, the fabricators actually welded hooks on the bottom of it because they were sure it was going to tip over, and they wanted to be able to grab it and be able to tow it out of there. It ended up to be the precursor to all of today's oil drilling platforms. It operated between 54 and 1986. It drilled 2,000 wells, and it drilled a cumulative total of 2.3 million feet. And I did the 2.3 divided by 2,000, that's 12,000 foot wells, all the time out of those 200 wells. Anyway, we stopped and did a tour of that, and then made our way over into New Orleans and enjoyed that. Shannon and I have a historical sort of a thing. On our decade birthdays, we splurge and go on a trip somewhere that's really special. My 60th birthday was going to be the Hilton Hotel along the river watching towboats and ships in downtown New Orleans. It turned out that we got an opportunity to go to Arizona to take a new job, so on my 60th birthday we moved into our now retirement home in Arizona, so we didn't get to do this. Well, so last year was just short of my 70th birthday, so I ended up getting my decade wish anyway. But it was marvelous. 22nd floor. These are pictures of you. We're looking right across at Algiers Point. One of the things that we enjoyed, and you might use if you go on a river trip, there is an app called marinegraphic.com. And if you want to look and see what boats are around and when they'll be to where you can see them, you can use that marinetraffic.com. So the first day that we used, that we did one leg of the trip, we went the 74 miles from downtown New Orleans down to the southern end of the Great River Road. Lots of what you'll see today will kind of help you understand that it's the Mississippi River from about Cairo, about where the mouth of the Ohio River enters, all the way to the Gulf is just an industrial corridor. It's not like this, where you just think of the romantic sort of water. It's just a big working river. And it was marvelous to learn and see that in this peninsula, it's just industrial also. There's lots of evidence of oil work and that sort of thing. There's a bunch of fishing that occurs down in that area. This Empire Lock is about 12 miles north of Venice, and there's a lock here that runs across. Both sides of that whole peninsula are lined with levees. And the levees are only down there, they're only about 12, 14, 15, maybe 2 stories high. And they're intended to prevent storm surge from inundating when they get a storm surge or a hurricane or a bad storm. And for the most part, they don't work. Everything floods, and they have massive pumps, and they have to pump it all out. But you'll see, well, here's one of this was Hurricane Zeta in 2020, and they were still repairing the power lines as we were going through 2021. And there's a bridge right here. We came over the top of this bridge, and that's a picture I took as we came over. With Hurricane Isaac, those were the trawlers of that whole fishing fleet. They all just, they got washed over there. So this is the very south end of the Great River Road. This is a jail on stilts, a high school on stilts, home on stilts, and there's a lot of manufactured homes. They've been flooded out so many times that there's hardly any on-ground homes left there. This is a little bit of a video to show you that rise of that dike. The river is right over here. And I don't intend for you to hear the audio there, but it just kind of gives you an idea. We're going over that dike, and the ships are just coming in right alongside here. It's really cool that way. I didn't expect to see this, but there were a number of heliports. Well, there's a massive amount of oil platform workers that go back and forth to the heliports. They work 2 weeks on and 3 weeks off. And then I did a little bit of research as a result of that. And there are 3,800 oil platforms in the Gulf, 23,000 miles of pipelines. We took a ship up into New Orleans, and we passed a couple of platforms, but I had no idea the enormity of that. And 840,000 workers, 18 refineries in Louisiana with a production of 157 million gallons of fuel a day. That's 15% of the nation's refinery capacity down there. So again, you see that it's really a working river. Another thing that, as a tow, the 2 decades I worked as a tow captain, I saw lots of coal shuffled around, and coal from Montana that's got loaded and took to Genoa, and power plants primarily. Well, it's gotten to be sort of way out of fashion now, but there's still a pile of coal that's shipped down the river, and there's 2 big transshipment facilities just north of Venice, and there's an amazing amount of, like 7 million tons annually of coal that is exported. India gets 18%, China 15%, Japan 9%, Netherlands 8%, and South Korea 7%. I guess we don't think about the fact that coal isn't everywhere, and coal is something that's needed to make steel too. So it just boggles my mind. This place right here was over 200 acres, and they can load 3 Panamax-sized ships at once, simultaneously. So I was just stunned to see that. And then all the barges I pushed with Minnesota grain, soybeans, corn, wheat, they load that stuff directly down there in the Gulf, all around, right onto ships. There is, in the book, in my research, I discovered the cost of mooring a ship, bringing a ship in, docking it, and then filling it with cargo. It's incredible. It's in the $250,000, $300,000 range just to do that. I don't know if it's any less when they do it, where it's not moored, but that's one of the amazing things, and I had never seen that before. I'd made a couple of different trips to New Orleans on towboats, but one was a construction boat, and we just never got into this where we could see it. But it is really amazing. Our top U.S. wheat exports: China, Philippines, Japan, and Republic of Korea by volume. Here's a little video of, we took the first of 2 ferry trips across the Mississippi. The river here is almost a mile wide. Cost $1. Shannon was 10 and 2. There's Riley and Shannon in the car there. And we're just cruising off across there. This particular ferry ran every half hour back and forth. And for a period of time, it was shut down, as I looked in kind of the history of it. And it's deteriorating to the point that it only carries cars. And here's a picture of what you see. You see, that's rust. So it's kind of we talked to the valet folks at the hotel, said, what would you do if you only had a few days? What's do not miss? Well, you got to do a plantation. Okay. So we picked Destrehan Plantation, which is only about 24 miles from downtown. On the way to and from, we passed the above ground cemeteries. Have any of you been to New Orleans? We've been there a number of times. One of the first times we took a tour of one of those above ground cemeteries, and they said that any of these tombs, maybe 50, 60 years after the loved one is long gone, there's nobody anymore to pay it or maintain it or anything. So they take the next person and just take their ashes and stick it right in there and kind of shove the bones of the other one to the back. That's pretty, that's what they said. I thought it was amazing, but it's kind of par for the course. This plantation was really amazing and humbling, and I don't really know what to say about the whole thing. The Destrehan Plantation raised indigo. That was their main crop into the 1700s, and they were around that area. Indigo was big, just second to tobacco. In 1790s, there was a crop failure with the indigo, so then everybody changed to sugarcane. But nevertheless, this is just a picture. There's on this slave cabin here. That's a slave cabin bed, just drop it. There's a picture of what they, what each slave was called, what their name was. He was a good digger and a woodcutter. This guy was a long sawer, teamster, and a laborer, and she had her daughter. So their value was based on, it's just really a cruel, thoughtful, thoughtless thing. We spent the day touring New Orleans, just puttering around. St. Charles streetcars are a National Historic Treasure, and they're there. The Cafe de Mon with the beignet and the chicory coffee. One of the things that I really think is the most beautiful thing, this St. Louis Cathedral, This downtown here in the French Quarter is just out of this world. It's another little picture that any of you that haven't been there, you can find a bunch of jazz around the square at any time of the day, and then of course in the evening time, it's something that's quite an experience. We took lots and lots and lots of videos, but I just edited a few pieces together to give everybody a kind of a taste of what it looked like. You can get your gator heads there, the bigger ones. This guy is mixing drinks there, and he's not using a shot glass. New Orleans is one of those places you can carry a drink without any problem anywhere you want to go. There's the beignet, sugar beignet. And this is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This is long before. After a while, they shut this all off and no cars can go on there, and it's full of people, when the evening time comes. People roll out onto the street. So the next segment that we took off from New Orleans, and our goal in that second day was to go to Natchez through Baton Rouge. Here's another example of the written directions. Another thing, again, kind of learn as you go when you're traveling, sugarcane. The whole sugarcane thing was kind of new to me, but this is an amazing thing, the amount of sugarcane that in Louisiana, they produce 15 million tons annually, and there's 440,000 acres of it. That 45% is 45% of the U.S. crops of sugarcane, and 20% of the United States domestic sugar comes about as a result of that. It's just really amazing. Here's another little video, just sugarcane everywhere you look. Shannon and I had a kind of a joke. We'd say, sugarcane, there's more sugarcane. What do you see, Tom? Sugarcane. This is kind of typical of some of the back areas in Louisiana, and lots of flat for 10 miles you could see just nothing but soybeans or sugarcane or whatever it was. I grabbed this video to show you the levees that are on both sides of the lower Mississippi River from New Orleans, from the Gulf all the way to the mouth of the Ohio River. This is probably 5 stories high, 50 feet high, and again, you can just see corn. I don't know that to be a fact, but I think that corn was ready to harvest, and this was August. So I'm thinking that they do in Louisiana and Mississippi what we do in Arizona, where they just harvested the wheat and replanted cotton. And then they'll harvest the cotton in March and replant wheat. And I'm thinking maybe something goes back into that ground right there when they combine that corn and go from there. But that levee, again, that kind of points out the industrial part of this whole thing. It's amazing when you think of all the drainage way that the upper Mississippi Valley covers. It's the 3rd largest watershed in the world. It drains 41% of the U.S., 1.25 million square miles. Rainwater from Great Falls, Montana, or the Allegheny State Park in New York, all could end up in the Gulf, going down through that way. In the book, there's 13 of these. I made a kind of a little fun fact sort of a thing out of it. And one of the things is at Lake Itasca, where the water's a foot deep going across those rocks that averages, the flow averages about 45 gallons per second. In front of downtown New Orleans, it's about 3.73 million gallons per second. So there's quite a difference. Another thing learned from traveling here, we went from on the Louisiana side of the Mississippi River all the way up through to Baton Rouge and even into Natchez. And we passed over these massive control structures. This one here I bet it was 5 miles from one end to the other. So again, I did a bunch of research. What occurs is when the river, again, you just saw that watershed. When the river floods to a certain point, all this down here is industrial. There's refineries and factories, and every chemical on the planet comes from that sort of an area down there. They can't let any of that get flooded. So they open these spillways. There's a Morganza spillway and old river control structures up above, and they dump it into the Atchafalaya, whatever, how you pronounce that, river, and it runs down in here. It's a natural drainage way. That's Morgan City, is where that oil platform was, and goes out into the Gulf here, and that's kind of their relief valve. And if that doesn't do it, they can also use the Bonnet car spillway here just above New Orleans. But that's a really good example of the kind of things that you learn when you travel that way. They had major floods there. In 27, that's when they had their first big flood. 23,000 square miles were flooded and 250 people died. So the government created all those levees beginning then. So they've had major floods since 37, 73, 2011, and 18 and 19. And in each time, they've been able to minimize the damage, although the farmers that are in those floodplain areas all lose their crops. So Baton Rouge, we went to the LSU Rural Life Museum. It was terrific. They have a whole community there of old historic buildings. One of my favorites is they had an area where they had just carriages and wagons and stuff. This is downtown Baton Rouge. We visited the Capitol Park Museum, lots of regional history information, a lot about the trawling and the fishing and the industry there. They had one whole division on the Green Book, and that was a traveler's guide. It was called the Negro Motorist Traveler's Guide. It was published between 1933 and 63 by a New York City postman. And believe it or not, I still can't kind of get my arms around that, but there were lots of sundown communities where black people were not allowed after sundown, and this book listed the restaurants that would welcome black travelers and hotels and that sort of thing, and it amazes me. It was really neat. We kept watching as we went north for the first Great River Road sign, and so about 20 miles south of Vicksburg, or south of Natchez, we found the first one. It was raining, pouring rain, right here, and we're driving along the top of this levee. The levee's actually up, the very top is right up there. We're just on this side of it. You can see on the map we're 29 miles from Natchez. And I said, stop the car, stop the car. So we backed up and opened the window and took a picture, but that was the first one. And nobody told me this, but my thinking is that they get battered so severely with storms, Brian would know this, that they just get sick of putting up any signs that aren't absolutely critical. And probably to them, a Great River Road sign is just we don't need those. They get the hurricanes and they have to replace them many times. Natchez, Vicksburg, and Greenville, all kind of the same. Really crickets, not much going on. The downtowns, almost all those little communities, the big Walmart came in out by the freeway, and then they built the high school out there, and the downtown is just left. This is August, and the Christmas lights are still up. So that gives you a pretty good indication of what kind of a civic.
They do film Christmas movies in Natchez, Mississippi.
Do they?
They do.
Well, maybe that's okay. Okay, that answers my question. I was thinking that's kind of an indication. They have this thing is called the Natchez Below the Hill Historic District. It's gorgeous, and they really did a lot of nice work there. Another one of those sort of really impacting things. There's a park in Natchez where it's called Trading at the Forks of the Road, and they traded slaves there for years and years and years and years. One of the first places that you could see, there was a beautiful park across the river from Natchez that's up here in the bluff, and I'm just crazy about towboats. So this 35 loads is 7 wide and 5 long. That's a big tow. It's 10,500 horsepower boat, AC Bell boat, cruising down through there. When we left Natchez, we went on the Mississippi side, and I was really excited. First time I've been on the Natchez Trace, another one of those things that you get to do. The Natchez Trace, originally, this is prior to steamboat days even, okay? So when the immigrants came from up in northeast United States, down the Ohio rivers and those tributaries, they used flatboats, and they just floated them. They keel boats, and that's how they moved things all the way down to New Orleans. When they got to New Orleans, they got off the boat and walked back. And so that's what this trail is from the Natchez Trace, and that's really a historical fact. It was popular. They used it during the Civil War, and it was kind of a popular thing up until the time of steam engines, and then once steamboats came in,
Native Americans actually made the Natchez Trace because they walked from Natchez to Memphis.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, Native Americans, I didn't bring that up, but they did it first. In Vicksburg, the Corps of Engineers has a wonderful Lower Mississippi River Museum. It has all sorts of information about all the drainage and flooding and all the work that they do. A great big dry dock towboat where you can get up in there. Riley didn't think too much of this. Riley is our dog. Didn't think too much of these open grates, 3 stories up in the air. But Shannon enjoyed driving the boat for the first time. So then again, Natchez, that day we're going Natchez, Vicksburg, and Greenville, and we're going up. There was an old depot museum in Vicksburg, really, really remarkable. Lots of good historical artifacts. And Greenville was our destination for that day. I worked for Twin City Barge and Towing Company, which was, they actually had the Sioux that was just down here for 10 years when they ran up the St. Croix River. And the Sioux was built in Greenville. All kinds of towboats that I worked on were built in Greenville. There was barges that were built in Greenville. So when I got to Greenville, I thought it was going to be this towboat construction building mecca. Not so. It wasn't really. I did do a little bit of tramping around, and I found one little shipyard, and there's a pile of propellers. I did a video in front of that. But what I did find there was this incredible museum. There's this Greenville History Museum. One guy, his name is Ben, I forget his last name, but he's the curator, and I can't tell you the number of different amazing things that were in there. In this 3-ring binder notebook right here, I just flipped that book open for no particular reason, and here's this document of Twin City Barge and Towing Company from 1987, and they had the annual report from 1978. They had the annual report from 1977, and I was the captain on that towboat. That's on the cover of that. So how's that for deja vu? It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So then between Greenville and going north towards Memphis, more fertile floodplain. Now we're getting into some cotton mixed in with the soybeans. And kind of in between there in northern Mississippi, there's the Tunica Resorts. And at one time they were the 3rd largest gambling revenues behind Las Vegas and Atlantic City. That was, I think it was probably prior to the Native American casinos, and it was a kind of a really big deal. And it was interesting, but they've been flooded out a number of times now. And what we stopped at this river museum, which is really, really nice, and it was right down, the resorts are here, and that river museum is kind of over here. They've created a landing here for the cruise boats. I don't know whether the cruise boats stopped there, but it didn't really look like there was a lot of activity, so I'm not sure about that. So then we're into Tennessee, and we get into Memphis. We have been there a number of times. It's one of my favorite towns. Memphis really has gone to the mat. They've created a beautiful cruise port there, and it's right on the river, and it's about 2 blocks walking up to Beale Street, which is right here. Just all you got to do is kind of walk up the hill. It's really a neat thing. One of our favorite stores is A. Schwab Mercantile. Has been there since the original family's still there, and it's been there since the 1800s. We have our books there. Mud Island, which is right here outside of Memphis, has a terrific museum called the Mississippi River Museum. It was closed when we were there, but they have a, I don't know, it's a sculpture, for lack of a better word. It has the whole lower Mississippi on it to scale. So if it's 100 feet deep, there's 100 foot, it's really, and when it's running 1 million gallons of water flow through there, it's really a neat place. And of course, Graceland. We actually drove over there and took a couple pictures, and it was late in the evening by the time we got over there, but Graceland is, it's really something. Another kind of a fun aside, we're traveling up, the next day we're going up on the Arkansas side, and Shannon's good friend says, my mom and dad were married in a little church in Arkansas there. Will you stop and take a picture of that church? Sure. So we go there. This is the picture. It's a Baptist church, and it's in Amarillo, Arkansas. So we're there, and I told Shannon, I said, you know what? We were right here. I said, I'm looking at the car dash. I said, let's drive over. I want to see what's on the other side of the dike right there by the river. So we drove down this thing here. 2 massive steel plants. I thought, again, a result of learning from traveling, I thought that all the structural steel that you see going into a skyscraper around here came maybe from offshore, or I don't know really where it came from. But it all comes from scrap steel in places like this. There was two great big giant arc furnace places. This Nucor steel right here that we drove by produces 2.5 million tons of wide flange beams and pilings. There was a mile of nothing but piles of beams. I was just amazed. It was really cool to watch the whole thing. And again, here's the levee. You go down over the other side, and it was still way down where that all occurred. Another piece that we discovered there was kind of sniffing around and snooping around, and we're up over here. But American Greeting Cards has a factory in Osceola, which is right there. 2.6 million square feet, 60 acres under one roof, biggest building in Arkansas, and that's the size of 54 football fields. So that was kind of cool to drive by that and see that. So we're continuing on up. We leave Missouri, cross the river at Carruthersville, and headed up into Kentucky and Tennessee. But we stopped at Carruthersville, and I thought this was a good slide to show you. The top of this wall is 50 feet above regular pool stage on the lower Mississippi. So there's the most recent high water mark, 47.7 feet. That's right there. And when the floods come, they put the gates in and then they keep the water from. But again, that demonstrates the idea. It's a working river. It's not meant to be for anything pretty. Down the river you go that way. We're at a beautiful, right at the confluence right here, Wycliffe, the confluence of the Ohio River. You can't really see it down there, but when you're standing up on that bluff, you can see way over into Missouri and Illinois and back up into Kentucky. It's really pretty. This is a better shot of it. The Mississippi there joins. Now this is where the upper Mississippi begins, and the Ohio goes this way. And Shannon hates this bridge, so I just put those pictures in there to really needle her. It's really narrow. One of the things that I think is really interesting here, and I'll just pause for a little bit to show you. Again, thinking about the fact that this is an industrial river. If you're going to take your sailboat, and you can to the Gulf from here, right? You come down the upper Mississippi, but you don't try to go down there. There's no more. No, it's not really. But you take a turn here to the left at Cairo, and you run over here to Paducah, and you run down the Tennessee River, and you go over, which eventually ends up, most of you have driven through Paducah on the way to Florida, haven't you? So that's Tennessee River there. But there's a 10-ton bridge waterway that runs from Florence right up in there down to the Gulf, and it's really a much less aggressive environment for somebody in a sailboat or a yacht, or so. You just never see it. But I think that's kind of fascinating and very telling. The Ohio River goes all the way up to Pittsburgh. You see the Missouri River's up here. The Illinois River that I worked on a lot runs up through that. It kind of gives you an idea. Some of the major ports here are on this other side. Now the other thing about this, from here north, you start to see riverbanks. You start to see bluffs. The Agassiz Glacier melt-off ran all down through there. And where the valley is wide, right here, between here and over yonder, it was sedimentary sandstone. And where it's narrow, it was limestone. So the water, couldn't wash that far away. But from here on up, it's river bluffs on both sides. We stopped at Cape Girardeau. The Cape River Heritage Museum was lovely. There's the Crisp Museum associated with the university is there. When we were there, the Queen of the Mississippi was there. I'm a little bit excited because I recently connected with the people that do those cruises, and they're expanding all the time, and they're doing more all the time. And it's a fair chance that I'm going to get an opportunity to be a Riverlorian for them next year, where you go on a boat for like a 7 or 8 day cruise, and you give a little talk at each port and you do various things. So I've connected up with them, and it sounds like it's going to happen. I'm just really kind of praying that it does, because I would love that. But here's Cape Girardeau. Downtown is a block up here. But here's again your levee wall right out on the river, and I assume the top of that is 50 foot above. The Queen of the Mississippi. Here at Cape Girardeau, and that's the Queen of Mississippi. It's just a good shot of how that works. They dock in there, and then people go uptown and spend their time, do whatever. She was built in 2015. She carries 150 passengers, 84 staterooms. All the rooms have private baths, Wi-Fi, interior entrances. Most have private patios with sliding doors facing out. Dining rooms on the main deck, 3 lounges on the second deck, library on the third deck, 2 more lounges on the fourth deck, promenade, shaded public area, sun deck, and putting green are all aft to the pilot house on the 5th deck. As we were going to our next sort of stop, we planned to stop at Chester and see Popeye. He's famous there. The big boy, we pulled into town. Chester is on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River, upper Mississippi now. And we went down by the river on purpose, and all of a sudden it's like a county fair. There's cars parked everywhere, and people sitting in lawn chairs and coolers and carrying on. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. And I said, what's going on? I talked to somebody, I said, what's going on? Big boy's coming. And so Big Boy is, there was 25 originally built by the Union Pacific. They're 1.1 million pounds. She was delivered, or it was delivered in 1941, and they ran between 41 and 61. They were really important. That was a massive locomotive. They were important to World War II to moving things back and forth. In this particular case, they did a 10-state tour that started at Beaumont, Texas, and ended up at Denver. Went all the way up through Chicago, and it was really, it's really something. So there is, once you're up in Illinois, you really kind of know you're in Illinois too. There's a lot of corn and just kind of country roads. Chester has this museum. There's a park right here, and it's got all kinds of statues and that sort of stuff. And really neat Popeye Museum right there. We crossed the river a little bit north there at St. Genevieve back over into Missouri and took another ferry ride. Again, I'm kind of intrigued by the working river part of this whole thing. This dock area right here is Mississippi lime, and it's a massive lime mine that is in St. Genevieve, Missouri. And again, all the years that I ran towboats, we had lime barges, and I kind of thought, well, how does that work, and where does it come from, that sort of thing. St. Genevieve's like Stillwater. Think Stillwater, just a bunch of boutiques and beautiful antique stores and various things. And then the kind of the riverboat epicenter of the world, St. Louis. They have, most of you probably know this, they have the second most free attractions of any city in the United States behind Washington, D.C. There's a lot to do in St. Louis, a lot of things to see and do. The Anheuser-Busch tour and the State Museum and this Transportation Museum has so many wonderful things. Took a bunch of pictures with Riley. You can get a cruise boat down there right underneath the arch there in St. Louis. How many of you have been up in the arch? It's kind of cool, kind of creepy. Kind of small. It's really. Now we start the locks and dams. Of course, another thing that I'm really acutely interested. So that's the arch down there. This is looking at Lock 27, which is the first lock, but I'm looking downstream here. This is the Chain of Rocks Canal, and Mississippi River goes down from there. But this is the first locks, 27, from now there's 27 locks that go up from here. This is a 1,200-foot lock. They take a 15-barge tow through there in one locking. I threw in a map to just show.
Why did they start here, the locking dams?
Because the Missouri River enters there, and there's enough water volume from there on down that they don't need the locks and the dams to keep the water level static. The locks and dams were built kind of as a stairway, and each dam was put in place so that they could have a minimum 9-foot channel to the next one. And that's, so if we have a drought up here and there isn't really any water, that keeps the river navigable. Where once you get to St. Louis, where the Missouri River runs in, now you got enough water volume with this. The Illinois River dumps in there, the Missouri River dumps in there. Now you have enough water that you don't need any dams. Good question, Mary. I should have told you to ask that question. So this is just a picture of locking up. You've all seen, or many of you, I'm sure, have stopped and seen the towboat pass through. There's just so many amazing statistics. One 15-barge tow is the equivalent of 1,050 semi-tractor trailers. And if they were bumper to bumper, that'd be 13.9 miles of tractor trailers. Just to give you an idea, there is 1,000, again, in one 15-barge tow. And people ask about how green moving freight by barges are. A loaded hopper barge carries 58,333 bushels of wheat. That's 2.5 million loaves of bread, if you work it out that way. Tank barge, loaded tank barge, 1.155 million gallons of gas, enough to keep 2,500 automobiles running for a year. Identical cargo by rail generates 30% more carbon dioxide than by barge, and trucks generate in excess of 1,000% more carbon dioxide. Spill statistics and safety statistics, there's 1 injury in the maritime sector for every 95 in the rail sector and 1,609 in the highway sector. So it's safer and greener by a long shot. In this same location, between St. Louis and Grafton, are 2 really neat things. Lock 26 has the National Great Rivers Museum, and again, Shannon's driving the boat, and the Lewis and Clark State Historical Site, which I'm just so fascinated with. One of the next trips I want to do is go all the way up where Lewis and Clark went. I think that'd be so neat. There's a full-scale replica keel boat in that museum, and that's a photo of it there. It's really, really nifty. They camped there that winter before they took off on their journey, right there in that spot. Now we're in the bluff time. So if you're on the west side of the river, it's not always, but lots of times there's bluff. There's almost always a railroad somewhere near around. The railroad bed goes up both sides of the Mississippi. So we're leaving Alton and Grafton, Illinois, and these are the stops that we're going to make along the way. Hannibal, of course, is where Tom Sawyer talked his friends into painting the bridge while he watched. And this is kind of a historic overlook. You got the Mark Twain boyhood home. Hannibal, downtown Hannibal again, is just like Stillwater. There's lots of boutiques and stores and this and that. Lock 21, we stopped and took a lot of video and enjoyed one of the first major viewing platforms. A lot of the locks and dams have these viewing platforms. So Shannon's standing up there. This is looking right straight down from the platform. You can kind of see the activity occurring. And we're getting a lot of meandering roads alongside the Mississippi and Illinois, bound through the valleys and around, and pastures where it's too steep to farm. In Keokuk, in the observation deck, they have taken an old double-decker bridge. So you can see the bridge here. The railroad was down below, and the highway used to be on top. This used to be where the highway went, but now there's a freeway bridge right here. And you go out to the end of that, and they made it into a parklet. And it's really cool. You can look right down at it. And Streamline Video has a video feed there. And it's on in our house in Arizona all the time. We watch it all the time. It's on YouTube. You can tune it in right now and see what's going on. Yesterday there was about a lot going on down there yesterday. There was all kinds of boats that went through there. But anyway, that's where you can find it, and you can. There's more than that location. There's a 24/7 video at Fort Madison too of the trains that go through there. So now we're in the Iowa aquaculture, tiny towns on the edge of the river, Montrose. You just come right out there and you're right there. The huge manicured lawns in a lot of cases, and the roadside veggies. So the tomatoes, cantaloupe, eggplant, zucchini, perennial flowers, they're just, you know you're in Iowa. This is Fort Madison. This is where the cruise boats dock, right up there. They've got this cruise boat thing really figured out well. Most of you know this, but the cruise boats have dedicated buses that go right with them. So if the cruise boat runs overnight, parks at Fort Madison in the morning, you can just walk uptown, or you can take a tour on the tour bus. And they take you out to some well-known location, but they go right along with them. And every day there's a dedicated, group of dedicated trips that you can take. Shannon has a number of very, very high-end pens. She's a collector. The Schaefer Pen Museum is in Fort Madison. I found it, and most of this was all my idea. So you can, and she's not near the museum buff that I am. So when I found that, I said, guess what's in Fort Madison? What? I said, Pen Museum. Well, I don't know. We pull up alongside it, and it's this. It doesn't look any more like a museum or anything's in that storefront than a Man on the Moon. She walks over, opens the door, and an hour and a half later she came out, and she was ecstatic. The docent was excellent. There was every possible collection. Schaefer was the original green. There wasn't any throwaway anything. It was all refillable and reusable. And we're talking, fountain pens and the whole deal. And it's all in there. And apparently it's really, really remarkable.
Tom, did you know that Karen and Pat's daughter Nancy designed those pens? She was the artist for the Schaefer Pen Company.
Wow.
For 20 years.
Wow. Wow.
Was that in?
Fort Madison.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's just amazing.
Nancy created those.
Muscatine has, this is a history and industry center, but it's really, used to call it the Pearl Button Museum. There was a whole industry in Muscatine, and that whole end of the river down there, all the way up into Red Wing. There was these.
They have them in Bayport too. They have a thing just like that set of pictures.
Yeah.
Down in Bayport by their river.
Yep, yep. If you were poor, you had wooden buttons. And if you were well-to-do, you had these buttons. That was the distinction in those years. And there's an amazing amount of information about the factories and kind of the innovative stuff they did there. Davenport, Rock Island, this is 16 bottoms, Brian. I counted them. So that's John Deere has a pavilion there. They've had presence in Rock Island and Davenport, Illinois for years and years and years. I don't think that they have as many factories there today as they used to, but this pavilion is just out of this world. One of my favorite things there, this is the picture of Davenport, Rock Island. Rock Island's on that side and Davenport on this side. There's a Lock 15 is in there. This Lone Star steamboat just stopped pushing barges in 1964, and it's just like the day they got off it that day. It's sitting inside this glass encased building, and it's really amazing. It's a steam towboat that actually operated very long. And in that same little town, LeClaire, Iowa, is the American Picker store, the original one. If you see the American Pickers on TV, you can stop in there and get yourself some antiques. Dubuque has really gone all night. They've created this beautiful historic district and area, and the casinos are all part of it. But this museum, this National Mississippi River Museum, is really remarkable. This William H. Black was a giant steam dredge, and again, it's parked, and you can crawl through every ounce of it, and it's just like the day they stopped using it. It's an amazing, amazing place. One of the things, and again, we're going to Dubuque and Prairie du Chien are the next ones. One of the things that I think is amazing, I was just thinking about this we're going to see some slides in a little bit here about talking about the milling district in downtown Minneapolis. One of the things that's in here, if especially for young people, when there was a mill and there was a water wheel and that wheel turned a shaft, or the first steam engines, that shaft went through a factory, and depending on the size of the pulley, it could turn these machines fast or slow, or that one shaft would drive these whole massive groups. The Industrial Revolution was built on this. So this is a belt-driven machine shop, and they have it demonstrated there. It's just fascinating to me. All the different things that were in that National Mississippi River Museum. Gutenberg, Iowa, this is a bluff-top view here as you go along. Iowa, you're back and forth from there. We're about a mile from the Mississippi here, but that's a beautiful scenic overlook, and you can see 50 miles across there. At Gutenberg, there's another visitor platform, but they have a lock house museum there. All the locks and dams had an assistant lockmaster and a lockmaster house. And in the days when they first put locks and dams, I suppose it was like when they had lighthouses. They always had a lighthouse keeper's house. They put them up, So they had these. There aren't anymore, but this one is still here. They got rid of them, and it's a really neat museum. There's a docent in there, and they tell you all about it. It's a pretty cool deal. As we cross the river into Wisconsin, yay, Valley Fish and Cheese and Prairie du Chien. That's a 45-foot muskie Shannon's standing behind. And you can buy, in that store, you can buy a raccoon. Yeah. Anyway, you can buy hides, and you can buy, it's the thing the same. Plus, they have cheese and all the good things. And here's a ghost from my past. This is it's in a field just out of view of Highway 35 going north. And it's I think a farmer must have bought it himself. It's a picture of the L. Wade Childers, the first towboat that I caught over here that I worked on the Upper Mississippi as a deckhand. And it was a gorgeous. These boats were horses. This was an old boat when I got on it. That's 50 years ago. And it was just, these were men, and I can't tell you. Well, it sunk, and then somebody salvaged it, and I got a hunch there's a dredge in this same place. I got a hunch whoever, maybe a wealthy, well-to-do farmer or something, was going to make a museum out of it. But it's just sitting there kind of as a ghost right now, and it's the dangest thing when you see it there. We stopped at La Crosse, at Grandad's Bluff. If you've never been, you have to go. It's gorgeous. You can see all the way into Iowa and southern Minnesota. It's absolutely beautiful. And, along the river road on the Wisconsin side, lots of trains, activity. We stopped in, Lake Pepin's coming up. We stopped in Winona, the Riverfront Park. There's a Winona Historical Society Museum. You're starting to see boathouses now. I think this is kind of fun because, again, my background, Brian, this is a pile of road salt, and they're just covering up in Winona Harbor. So every one of those little towns, probably Rochester, Minnesota, all the southern Minnesota towns and southwestern Wisconsin towns get their road salt from that pile, I'm sure. But it all comes, when you see tows going by here that have loaded barges, chances are really good it's road salt. It goes up here into the city and it gets redistributed around. But there's other things that comes north in loaded barges, but a lot of it's road salt in the summer, and then it goes grain back out. Yep. Let me see. Okay, and then I happen to be right here there's a bridge that crosses over to the observation deck at Lock 4 at Alma, and I got to see a train. I got a bunch of video and stuff of that. That was really neat. Lots of these little towns, Genoa and Alma and Stoddard, and they're 1 block wide, cling to the side of the bluff, and then the railroad tracks on the riverside. And there's so many little cute named restaurants and hotels and gin mills. It's just really fun. They actually have a big fishing float over here that's pretty successful too. Wabasha, of course, I'm sure most of you have been to the National Legal Center. They really go all out for Septoberfest to get all the got Slippery's, when in fact that wasn't where the Slippery's bar was. Slippery's bar is actually in Minneapolis, someplace that they used in the movie. Anyway, these guys, if you go in there though, they have a room about half this size that's full of artifacts and fishing poles. You can buy the Red Hornet or whatever it was from that. It's really, they're pretty sharp, from the marketing. One of my favorite bookstores in Red Wing, Fair Trade Books, that we have a nice relationship with. This Red Wing Marine Museum is fascinating. The Red Wing is another place that they've really went all out for the cruise boat folks. Shannon and Riley got the picture alongside the world's largest boot. How many of you seen that? Have you ever been there? It's really cool. It weighs 100 pounds. It's 20 feet long, 7 feet wide, 16 feet high. There's 1,200 feet of nylon rope used in this stitching. It's just some of the statistics there's a whole bunch more. There's a really cool picture of them towing it through downtown with a Ford Model A, or not a Ford, one of those low Ford tractors. Somebody's towing it into town. They have a total of 4,000 hours went into the design, the manufacture, and the fabrication of that boot. And then we got the Freedom Center in Prescott. Can we all say? Yeah. The National Great River Road Visitor Center and Freedom Center in Prescott. Nice, just top notch in every way. Can't say enough good about it. All your signs and all the stuff that's so neat. You get a picture? And now we're in the last leg. So we spent a day mulling around the Twin Cities, Shannon's family, and just kind of getting in and visiting. And for the book, there's a lot of information in the book about what you would want to see around the metro area and the cities. And you're all from here, so you all know. 40 million people a year go through the Mall of America. It was their 30th anniversary just last week. It's amazing, just absolutely amazing. Shannon worked for the city of St. Paul for 4 years, just about 3 blocks from where she worked. They knew her name. It's a Candyland store. They say, "Hi, Shannon." She always said that wasn't a very good deal. Inside the Science Museum, there is a Mississippi River Visitor Center, and they've done a really nice job. You can tie a rope. I saw you have some of those out here. too. That's a really cool thing. So now from here we're headed up. We're going to make a stop in, I'll stop here. I've been biking every day. This Grand Rounds bike trail in Minneapolis. This is the head of navigation. Again, most of you know this, but I kind of put this slide set together for some that may not know. They closed this, well, actually the head of navigation is Lower St. Anthony right here, but they closed this dam because of Asian carp. They didn't want them to move any further north. There wasn't a lot of river commerce north of there to begin with, but they just said, and it's closed, it's permanently shuttered. So, and that, I think that was probably a really good decision. But this is what I was thinking about with the milling stuff. If you haven't been to the Mill City Museum, it's really incredible. The city of Minneapolis was the flour milling capital of the world for a half a century. It was really, and all of that was powered originally by water through sluices, through spinners, back in the day. It was really very creative. So we're headed now upstream, the last leg going to Bemidji. You can find a museum just about any place that'll show you the big piles of logs, the old white pine, and all that forest that got cut off. And the river changes between, there's about a half a dozen hydroelectric facilities along the way, so they dam it up a little bit where it's a little bit wider, but even this is only a few feet deep. But for the most part, the river becomes a stream. And Munsier Gardens in St. Cloud is wonderful, the Lindbergh Museum in Little Falls. And now you're starting to see Paul Bunyan and the Blue Ox, and he seems to be everywhere up there. He's also at Bemidji. Now we get to, I put this slide in, when we think about the whole watershed of the upper Mississippi, now this is just the upper Mississippi. So all the Crow Ring River and the Pine River, Willow River, all these rivers run into the Mississippi, it runs through here. And then it goes through Lake Winnebagosh and Cass Lake, and then at last Bemidji Lake, and then it starts over here in Lake Itasca. But it makes quite a circuitous journey up through there. How many of you have been to Itasca State Park? Were any of you there back when the big pines were there, before they had the big blowdown in 2007? There used to be some gorgeous big trees. There's a handful of them still there. Have any of you been to the Lost 40? I have too. There's a place in Minnesota where the surveyors screwed up. And when they were butchering all the white pine to send it down the river to build all the wood buildings all over America, they missed about 40 acres. And there's still 300-year-old pine trees in that. It's called the Old 40, and it's really neat. I've been there. It's spiffy. I can't remember exactly where it is. It's sort of more central Minnesota. But there are still some beautiful, large, giant trees in Lake Itasca. So then we get to the final end. This Mary Gibbs Mississippi Water Center has some terrific displays and great information, and I'm sure most of you have been here. You walk up and you kind of walk across the path. And here's a little talk that I do right at the end. I'll see if, well, maybe it'll come out loud. So we're here, Venice, Louisiana, to the headwaters of the Mississippi River and Lake Itasca. Oh, sorry. But anyway, all I say is we're here. It was a trip of a lifetime, and it's kind of a good deal, sort of a thing. So, all right. So that is the end of the slide sets. I wonder if anybody has any. Thank you. I hope that it helped you all think about what a fun trip that could be for you, or any of the segments about it. The book has lots more details. A couple of quick little interesting asides. You saw that picture of the shell thing in Muscatine. We have our books there. The curator, the director of that museum, contacted me through email, and he read the All About Towboats book. And he said we started an email dialogue. Well, he read this. I can't think of the guy's name, but there's a gentleman who's done a number of transportation books. He talks about being on a train. He talks about being on towboats. He writes about this, but we have that in common. He was a fan of this guy's reading. We got to visiting a little bit, and I used the conversation with him by email and made it into a verbal conversation. I ran into him at the museum. Plus I added a little bit of research, so it ends up to be about 1.5 pages or 2 pages of dialogue in the book. Similarly, 6 months ago, out of the blue, a guy contacted me that was a retired towboat captain, worked on American Beauty. That was a boat that I ran for American Transportation Company too. And he had only retired about 6 or 7 years ago. I was missing a lot of information about how they do it now, because I got off the boats in about 1990, okay? So he and I ended up having a terrific amount of email communication, which ended up being about 5 pages of narrative in that chapter where the picture of that big cross is in Wickliffe, Kentucky. I pretend that we met at a picnic table there, started to visit about it, and I learned, oh man. So I learned, when you see a towboat out here today, you'll almost never see wheel wash, not very much wheel wash anymore. And you used to be, there was a big set of rollers came down, everything was full ahead. When I ran towboats, it was hooked up all the time. Well, now they have a thing, I can't think of the acronym, but it's a digital location system where everybody knows where everybody else is. And there's frequently, in 2 or 3 days between St. Paul and St. Louis, you'll end up with 5, 6, 8, 10 hours of lock delay. So what they've all figured out is when they know there's somebody there in the lock, let's just float them down there, and then we'll arrive without having to, instead of burning up all that fuel, we'll arrive, without having done that. And that's why that's all occurring today. And that was an example of some of the things that we talked about. I didn't know that for sure. I had an idea that was the case, but anyway, so that was, there's a lot of that sort of things in the book. Does anybody have any questions?
So why'd you start at the bottom and go north instead of start at the top and go south?
I don't know, just because the Gulf was the New Orleans thing, and I think it was I probably explored it from, that's a good question, Liz. Probably explored it from both directions. I always strategize everything based on cost too. This was right at the back end of COVID. So hotels were inexpensive. The one-way rental car was a bargain. And maybe it was too expensive the other way. I don't remember exactly how, but for us to just fly, and it was Riley's first airplane flight. So for us from go to Phoenix to Houston was a small little jaunt. Went real well, and then we went from there, and then we returned home from Minnesota, But that's a good question. It just turned out that way. I suppose if we all think about it flowing the other direction, so logic would say we would start in Minnesota and go the other direction. There's a couple of other books out like this, and they all start from north and go south. So. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it very much. If you want a signed book, they are selling them here for $14. So if you want to buy one, and I'll sign it, and I'll be happy to do that. They are able to get them here. So
$13, $12.95. So yeah, special discount. And of course, for our viewing audience as well, we have all of Tom's books here. He has 3 other books, and Tom, you should be the one holding these, but we have all of Tom's books here. When he talks about his earlier growing up here and his earlier trips up and down the Mississippi, I mean, it's kind of fun to hear you take it by road.
Yeah.
When you had the river memorized.
This book is actually a trip. You get on the towboat in St. Paul, it's the end of the year, and we're going all the way around, all the way down the Mississippi River, all the way to Cairo, back up and up the Illinois River to Chicago, and it's the whole trip. You're there in the pilot house listening to the stories, and it tells you it's the whole thing. It's lots and lots and lots of dialogue, and you feel like you're right there in the pilot house. It's really well written. So
these are
if I don't say so myself.
So we are so excited for that, and also for those of you who are here and who are not on our mailing list yet and have not received their newsletter, grab one of our newsletters. We have a new one that will be coming out shortly, but this has an introduction to who we are and what's happening here in our future, and We are really grateful for all of your support and all of the support over the years. We've been the Great River Road Visitor Center for 16 years now, and that has only happened through the generosity of friends who keep us going year after year after year. So thanks everybody for being here, and thank you, Tom,
Yes, thank you,
for
sir.
joining us
Yep,
today.
appreciate it.
That was awesome.